Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Utah's case against alleged Charlie Kirk shooter Tyler Robinson. Erica Kirk will lead Turning Point USA after husband Charlie Kirk was killed in Utah. And Robert Redford, Sundance founder and Hollywood icon, dies at 89. Joining me today are Salt Lake Tribune reporter Paighten Harkins. Paighten, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Later we'll be joined by State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. We're also joined by Culture, Food, and Business editor Sean Means. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Well, Peyton, let's start with you. Of course, the big news last week, the tragic shooting of Charlie Kirk here in Utah on the campus of Utah Valley University. Now you're working on a story along with Emily. Much more coming out about the shooter, the alleged killer. His name was Tyler Robinson, so I guess he's now been charged. Maybe let's start there. So what's he been charged with?
So he's been charged with 7 counts. The first one was aggravated murder, and then he's charged with a few other counts sort of related to other things prosecutors say he did at the scene that day. One is, felony discharge of a firearm. There's 2 obstruction of justice charges, a misdemeanor count of violence committed in the presence of a child, a witness tampering count. But yeah, obviously the big one there is the aggravated murder charge, because, in addition to that charge being filed, prosecutors have also said that they intend to seek the death penalty if Tyler Robinson is convicted.
In order to seek the death penalty, there has to be aggravating factors. What are they citing as aggravating factors?
Yeah, so the aggravating factor they're keying into is this idea that they're, if the shooter misfired, potentially there could have been multiple victims. He allegedly shot, over the crowd of people that was gathered at UVU, and so the idea there being that there could have been multiple victims. And this is less of a factor, but still a factor. They also used a relatively new law in Utah, our victim targeting enhancements that was passed in 2019, kind of more colloquially known as our hate crimes statute. They used that law to enhance some of his charges. Basically, depending on the level of charge, an enhancement could increase it one level. So say it's a misdemeanor A, that could turn it into a 3rd-degree felony. And so in this case, they've enhanced some of the offenses with a victim targeting enhancement, and it's basically saying that Robinson allegedly targeted Kirk because of Kirk's political expression. And so that was some kind of factor. It wasn't a factor that led to the death penalty being a consideration, but it was something that they want, Board of Pardons and Parole to know, later on, that there's this enhancement on these charges.
So Governor Cox early on said we would seek the death penalty. State would seek the death penalty. The prosecutor says he wasn't influenced by anybody else. He came to the decision on his own.
Yeah, which that's going to be important. When I heard Spencer Cox and others call for the death penalty early on in this case, before a suspect was even in custody, it made me think, if I was a defense attorney, this might be something that I would key onto in terms of just like, could I say that these comments unfairly prejudiced any sort of jury, or something like that, so that's something that might be an issue later. That's something I'm actually trying to suss out right now.
So the charges filed, I was quoting from your story, charges filed reveal more details about Robinson's political ideologies, his actions after the shooting, and his parents' growing realization their son may be involved in the shooting. Maybe start with his the shooter's political beliefs. What have we learned?
Yeah, there was all sorts of speculation, I mean, even in the moments just after this shooting, what motivated the person that fired. And, we got kind of clues about that in the probable cause statement that they filed, after they had arrested Robinson. And it mentioned that his mom had said that he had become, more political, more radical, but it didn't say, what side of the political spectrum. And so these charging documents revealed that, he seemed to have been radicalized more towards the left. I think the quote in the charging documents was that he had become more, pro-gay and more pro-trans rights, was one of the things that they mentioned. And apparently he and his dad, differed very much politically, and that was, a topic of conversation. And, apparently in these disagreements, prior to Charlie Kirk coming to Utah, they had disagreed about Charlie Kirk, with Tyler Robinson, allegedly saying that he thought Kirk spread too much hate. And so yeah, that was the big reveal there was, which way had he allegedly been radicalized.
Those details are quite chilling. We've learned, we think that Robinson was in a romantic relationship with a transgender individual. They texted that individual, right, saying, "Look for a note." Tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was, that was the insight that we got on sort of what apparently happened after the shooting. And it was, Robinson had texted this roommate slash romantic partner and said, allegedly according to charging documents, look, there's a note underneath my keyboard, basically, read it. And so the roommate did. And it was, I want to get the direct quote. It was, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk and I'm going to take it," was apparently what this note said. And so then, we get snippets, not the entire conversation. I think there's been some views about that, but we get some snippets of the text message conversation that happened between these two after. And the roommate, just seems totally shocked about this happened, kind of in disbelief, very gratuitous question marks that they used when they said, what are you talking about type thing. And yeah, Tyler, goes on to say that, he's been planning this for a bit over a week. And then he kind of starts fixating on the fact that he left, one key piece of evidence behind at the scene. And that's this bolt action rifle that they found in a wooded area near UVU after the shooting. And so that's kind of where we leave that conversation there. It's just, what am I going to do about this gun? My dad is asking me about the gun. I'm going to have to leave the gun. I'm really upset about it.
Later, in exchange, I'm not sure with who, Robinson says that he hoped, I guess, to get away with this, maybe talk about it on his deathbed.
Yeah. And he says, and this was in the conversation with that roommate, he said, I'm sorry to involve you. And by that, I took that to mean he was sorry to have, let the roommate in on his secret, or let the roommate know what he had been up to for whatever reason. Cause yeah, he said he had hoped to take it to his grave, but the thing that, tied him to the scene was that when police released the security footage, the images, he looked familiar to his mom, apparently, and his mom started having some questions. And then, she brought his dad in, and he also thought that, this person looked like their son. But then, going back to the gun, that was, police also released photos of this gun, and it's a pretty unique, from my understanding, type of rifle, and it has a unique scope on it. And so, those two things combined, they got the parents thinking that, this must be him, and also, led to his apparently warranted fears about the gun, leading police to him.
My understanding is the mother first, I guess, saw the video footage, the stills from this video footage, and said that looks a lot like my son. The father, I guess, came to agree. Then they involved a family friend, I guess.
Yeah, I believe it was a neighbor who is a former Washington County deputy. They got with this person, spoke with Tyler, who was apparently in these moments, contemplating dying by suicide. He was worried about going to jail and stuff, and apparently, they convinced him to turn himself in, and that happened relatively peacefully. There was, some confusion in the aftermath of that happening. There was, I believe it was President Trump was on TV and said that, his father was a Washington County deputy or something like that. But it turns out the Washington County deputy that was involved was just, a neighbor and a family friend. And that's who kind of helped helped get Tyler Robinson to turn himself in.
No other evidence in this case. The bullet casings, right? So they've retrieved, I think, 3 unfired and 1 fired. What did presumably Tyler Robinson engraved on these bullet casings? What did they say?
Yeah, so in the 3 unfired casings, and he goes in these text messages that he exchanged with the roommate, he brings up like, do you remember me engraving those bullet casings? So he talks about it there. And then he says, they were basically just memes, like kind of online jokes that he was etching into these bullets. So, the 3 unfired, one of them said, "Hey, fascist, catch," and had arrow symbols after it. That it's my understanding that these arrows correlate to controls that you would put into a video game that would drop like a large bomb. And then one of them said, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO." And then another one said, "Oh, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao Ciao," which are the lyrics to a famous, not famous, but, sort of a well-known anti-fascist song. And, it's all speculation, sort of what he meant by any of these things, other than he said they were a joke. But then the fired casing, it had, and this might be sort of the most, the phrase that means maybe the least to people, but it says "notices bulge," OWO, which is like sort of an emoticon. It's supposed to show like a kind of a cute surprised face. So "notices bulges," this surprised cute face. What's this? Was on the fired casing. And there's all sorts of speculation about what this means. Perhaps it has some meaning in like furry culture or something, but I have not super delved into that one.
Yeah, it's speculation. These phrases, do we have any other evidence of where Tyler Robinson was in the dark corners of the internet or social media?
I really don't know. It's the New York Times did a story where they'd gotten some chats from a Discord, just sort of like group Tyler Robinson was in with some of his friends. And, the impression I got from what like that Discord group was it just seemed like, people kind of hanging out on a forum, like I didn't get the impression that it was a, political, particularly political group, or anything like that. And that's not even to say it wasn't. That's just not what has been reported. So yeah, I don't know too much about what he was doing online or, any particulars about how he may have become radicalized.
On there's been much discussion about this Discord chat. Was it there that he implied that he had killed Charlie Kirk? I know he implied it to his parents, I think.
Yeah, and so there was some confusion early on. There was a conflation between the messages Tyler Robinson had exchanged with his roommate, which were, either through text messaging or some kind of like phone number based communication like WhatsApp or something like that. And so that's where, discussing the rifle, saying that he had done it, the gun drop, all that stuff. But on this Discord chat, he, somebody similar to his mom had said like something to the effect of like, "Oh, what was this, you?" Or, "This kind of looks like you." And he had joked. And, in hindsight, some of the jokes he made were awfully prescient. He would, something along the lines of like, "My doppelganger's trying to get me in trouble. Let me hide my, manifesto and exact copy replica gun." Something, these aren't exact quotes, but they're pretty close. He had made sort of those jokes in the Discord chat, but when I reached out to Discord, they said, they confirmed he had an account and said that from what they could tell, he hadn't done any of the planning or discussed, escalating violence or anything like that on Discord.
Anything else you'd like to say about this?
Oh, just that, there's just still so much that we don't know. And this is a case that has attracted just so much attention. I had heard, from, Emily and others who were, down at the scene that this is the most national media attention that has been on an issue in Utah since maybe Elizabeth Smart. I mean, this is a lot of eyes are on this case. And so just caution people that when information comes out that there's, take a lot of it with a grain of salt. There's still just so much we don't know. And the wheels of justice move slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And so just who knows how long it's going to take before we know as much as people are hoping to know in this case. But we'll be on it, giving people that information as soon as we know it.
Yeah, we appreciate that. At the end of your story, you talk about an execution, and this is looking way down the road. If Tyler Robinson is convicted, and of capital murder, and then it might be decades. These capital cases sometimes take decades to the execution. But Ralph Menzies was recently. He was due to be executed by firing squad. That's now been put on hold because he has dementia and other evaluations needed. But the new prison out there has a chamber where you can either, those before 2004, those convicted before 2004, have had the choice of firing squad. Those after lethal injection. But tell me about the prison out there is outfitted for this.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a couple of years ago that they built the prison. And so when they built it, they had in mind that Utah, has the possibility of the death penalty, and there are two methods to use it. And so the room is set up to where basically it can be configured for, either use. There's holes in the wall where the firing squad can, stick their gun muzzles through. And then there's like a platformed sort of area where the gurney can be if you're dying by lethal injection. And then obviously there's the witness rooms where they can see in and see what's happening in either case. And so decades from now, if Tyler Robinson is convicted, it's very possible that room is where he will die.
Well, let's take a break. We're talking to Paighten Harkins, a reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune. Later, we'll talk with Sean Means. And on Behind the Headlines, which is the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. When we come back, a little more conversation with Paighten Harkins. Paighten, I want to talk to you about Utah judge signing an order meant to protect Charlie Kirk's widow. Also, we'll just mention that a new leader for Turning Point USA, which Charlie Kirk's organization, has been chosen. And later in the program, we'll talk about Robert Redford, the Hollywood icon who died at 89 this week. More following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We continue conversation with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Paighten Harkins. So I want to talk about this, a brief story, but important. Here's the headline: Utah judge signs order meant to protect Charlie Kirk's widow. So tell me about this. Is this routine? The judge signed this order?
It is fairly routine. A lot of times in a case where I would say I'm most familiar with it in domestic violence or cases that have some kind of, sex crimes component to it. But it's fairly common, and Utah statute allows a judge to basically enact one of these pretrial protective orders, at any time during a hearing that the defendant is at the hearing. And so it's fairly standard in that way. But yeah, it's more potentially relevant in cases where the suspect has the opportunity to post bail, which Tyler Robinson doesn't have in this case. So he's likely going to be behind bars all the way through these court proceedings. But, in talking with the spokespeople for those prosecutors, they tell me that it was, important in this case to get this order on file so that, not only could Robinson be restricted from, sending a letter, trying to call, or, whatever means he has to contact Erica Kirk whilst he's in jail, but also, any means to indirectly communicate with her, say that he directs somebody to try to contact her, or, something like that. They told me that this protective order was put in place to just, try to prevent something like that happening, to protect her as a victim in this case, which is what that order, you know, designates her as.
Mm. Let me just mention this one more story on this. This is Emily Anderson Stern's story. Here's the headline: Erica Kirk to lead Turning Point USA after husband Charlie Kirk was killed in Utah. Of course, Charlie Kirk founded this organization, headed it up, Turning Point USA. Part of what they did with the organization was go around campuses and other places, and that's what he was doing at U of U. He was set to come to Utah State University later this month, and I think that event is still on. Some other events as well. Yet to be determined who will headline those events. Anyway, Turning Point USA, the question was who's going to head up the organization. Now we know Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, will head up Turning Point USA.
Yeah, and this was, this was apparently something that they'd had previous discussions about. The idea that somebody else would need to lead this organization in the event of Charlie's absence was apparently something they'd contemplated, which, I don't think is that odd or anything, but just wanted to mention.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Paighten Harkins. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Well, let me turn next to Sean Means, who's culture, food, and business editor, also a movie critic. Remind me where you can find your reviews. Movie Cricket. Sean?
I have reviews on moviecricket.net. That's my website.
Okay, that's where you can find the reviews. And of course, you've been involved, involved with the film industry for many years, and therefore know a lot about Robert Redford. So we want to turn to you. Here's the headline: Robert Redford, Sundance founder and Hollywood icon, dies at 89. So you have a kind of a sweep of his life here, Sean. For me, and I think many of our listeners, Sean Robert Redford's always been there. Tell me a bit about the young Robert Redford. Where did he grow up, and tell me about his early life first.
Okay, he was born down in Santa Monica, California. Grew up in Santa Monica, which was instructive in that it allowed him to be near Hollywood and develop a attitude about Hollywood where he was not impressed by it or intimidated by it the way many young up and coming actors tend to be. He sort of saw firsthand what Hollywood was about as an industry, and so he didn't feel very intimidated by it. His initial dream was to be an artist. He wanted to be a painter. He talked about, like, when he was young, he wanted to go to Paris and put on a beret and be a painter. But he wound up going to college on an athletics scholarship, playing baseball for University of Colorado. Only lasted about a year. College was not, he and college didn't get along very well. And then he went to New York to be originally to be an artist, but he discovered that being an actor actually helped pay the bills a little bit better. And he got married fairly young and to a Utah woman, Lola Van Wagenen, and because of that, she brought him to Utah for the first time, and that's how he discovered the place and fell in love with it. And when not long after they were married, they bought a 2-acre parcel in Provo Canyon and built a cabin there. And that cabin still there, still his home. And according to all reports, it's where he died on Tuesday. Bob always talked about how Utah was his sanctuary, his refuge from Hollywood. One of his favorite lines was, "Other people have analysis, I have Utah." And it grounded it. I think it grounded him. It steadied him dealing with all the ups and downs of acting. So in his acting career, I mean, he split his time between New York and L.A. In the early days, doing Broadway, doing stage work, but then also doing TV a lot. He did a lot of the, there were a lot of shows back in the late 50s, early 60s that were like anthology shows that were basically, shot live to tape or broadcast live. So you needed to have the skills of a Broadway actor where you could, work on the fly. If a prop fell down, you could roll with it, kind of thing. And he did a lot of those. And um, but then he also came to LA frequently and worked in TV. He did an episode of The Twilight Zone that is very one of the best ones made. He played the Angel of Death, essentially, and to convince a elderly woman that death was not something to be feared. And it was friendly, and it had the friendly face of Robert Redford. He did a Perry Mason. He did Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He did shows like that. Uh, in New York, his big break. I mean, one was that he did a version of The Iceman Cometh, the Eugene O'Neill play in the early '60s, and one of his co-stars was Jason Robards. And he remembered that, and and years later, when Redford was producing All the President's Men, he gave Robards basically his comeback role as Ben Bradley, uh, and which won Robards an Oscar. And there were a lot of connections like that for Redford. He made a lot of happy connections over the years. His first movie was a World War II movie called War Hunt, not very well remembered, but one of the actors he worked with was this guy named Sidney Pollack. And he and Sidney got along great and became great friends. And then Sidney moved it more into directing, and he directed Redford in 7 movies, including 3 Days of the Condor, The Way We Were, Out of Africa, which was one of the 3 Best Picture winners that Redford was associated with over his career, along with The Sting, and of course the movie he directed, his first directing effort, Ordinary People, in 1980. Uh, the other Broadway work he did that got attention is he was in 1963 he did the play Barefoot in the Park, uh, the Neil Simon comedy, and he played the sort of uptight New Yorker married to the free-spirited woman, and did that role on Broadway. And then 4 years later, when they made the movie, he they brought him over to play the role in the film, and they paired him up with a beautiful young actress named Jane Fonda. And that, again, another connection that lasted over the decades, because they went on and did Electric Horseman in '79, I believe it was, and they did Our Souls at Night just a few years ago for Netflix. Um, Bob's heyday probably was late '60s, early '70s. The movie that made him a star, not just got him in acting, got him, starring roles, but made him a bona fide movie star, of course, was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where he paired with Paul Newman. And that was interesting because the studio did not want Redford in that role. They wanted somebody who was a little bit more of a bankable star. And it was the director, George Roy Hill, and Newman, who said, no, Newman said, hey, I want to work with the actor. I want to give the kid a shot. And that made Redford's career. And of course, because of that, the Sundance name, this great symbol of, an outlaw, is the name he gave to the ski resort he bought near his cabin, and called it Sundance. It's still the Sundance Mountain Resort to this day. Um, and from that built up everything else that we know of as Sundance, the Sundance Institute, the Sundance Film Festival, and everything else. And it was a great sort of symbolic marker of outlaw spirit, outlaw sensibility. Uh, and that built, his roles in the '70s, when he was able to start deciding what kind of movies he wanted to make. He didn't want to necessarily do everything the studio wanted him to do. He started producing his own stuff. Great early examples were like Downhill Racer and The Candidate, which were both movies that were about a theme he was very concentrated on over the years, which was about the idea of winning and the importance of winning in America's society and what people will do and what sacrifices they will make to win. Um, and with Downhill Racer, he was very determined about making that movie, and it did not do well at the box office. And he thought one of the reasons was that the studio did not give it the support it needed. And that's when he started thinking about what filmmakers and what storytellers can do outside the Hollywood mainstream to get their movies made and get them out to the world. And that's what got him thinking of the ideas that led to and formed the backbone of the Sundance Institute. Independent film wasn't a thing really in before Sundance. There were some filmmakers, they called them regional filmmakers because they weren't necessarily in LA. And and by creating Sundance, Bob created a framework and a movement for independent film in the United States. And after a few years of workshopping and developing those voices and those talents, Redford looked around and said, we need someplace to show these movies. We need someplace to be a showcase for the movies we make. And there was a film festival in Utah, the U.S. Film Festival, that needed a little help, struggling, needed some help. And Redford said, okay, well, how about Sundance take that over? And Sundance took over the U.S. Film Festival, took over the operations. In 1985, the first year Sundance ran that festival, one of the movies that played was Blood Simple, the first movie by the Coen brothers. And so it started to even then establish itself as a place to be seen for your good directors on their first films. The one that really put them on the map, though, was 1989, was Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Steven Soderbergh's first film. And it was the first movie to come through Sundance and get $1 million distribution deal. And once people figured out, oh, people are writing checks to pay for these things, that's when the floodgates really started opening, and Sundance became really what it is now.
Well, let's take a little break. When we come back, more about Robert Redford. We're talking on Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. More about Robert Redford, who died this week at 89, following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We're talking in this part of the program with Salt Lake Tribune Deputy Enterprise Editor Sean Means. We're talking about Robert Redford, Sundance founder, Hollywood icon. He died this week at 89 at his place up Provo Canyon. So Sean Means, I want to make sure we get this in. Tell me about the Robert Redford you knew. You encountered him. I don't know how often, but more often than me, certainly. Tell me about the Bob Redford you knew.
Will do. I first interviewed Bob in 1994, and let me say, you are told early and often that he is to be addressed as Bob. He insisted on that, not Robert, not Mr. Redford, just call him Bob. And one of the things about that, I interviewed him in 94, first year I covered the festival, and then I did a full interview later that year when his movie Quiz Show came out. And one of the things that struck me about Robert Redford is, I mean, there have been interviews about how in his earlier days in Hollywood he was uncomfortable about the way people treated him because of how handsome he was, how good looking he was. And that because of that, he felt like he was underappreciated or underestimated because he's good looking. He can't be smart at the same time. By the time I met him, and he was 57 when Quiz Show came out, I think he had gotten over that, or not necessarily gotten over that, but he had figured out how to work with that and work with his work with his handsomeness, and also to um, I think his superpower was in making other people more comfortable around him because he knew the effect he had on people, and he was very good at calming you down and getting you over the oh my God, I'm in the room with Robert Redford aspect of things, and um, could put you at your ease and put you at the ease of meeting one of the most famous and most attractive human beings ever to live. Um, and he did that very well. Um, first time I met him, I was very nervous going in, but pretty much when he showed up, that those nerves kind of subsided, and we just got talking and got talking about uh, talking about the movies and talking about why he was inspired to do the things he did. Um, a couple times, uh, one time that was quite interesting to me was for a couple years, for 4 years, I was invited to moderate the opening day press conference at Sundance at the film festival, and that was fun. I appreciated that because it was an indicator that Bob trusted me enough to um, be continue to be a journalist, but also that I understood the Sundance story in some ways that maybe other people weren't so familiar with. One year, the opening press conference was the same morning that the Oscar nominations came out, and this was the year when Redford had made the movie All Is Lost, his one man drama where he played a man on a round the world sailing trip, and in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a container vessel strikes his boat and it's taking on water, and he has to figure out how to survive. And it was a great performance, and most people expected he would get an Oscar nomination out of it, and he did not. And we the thought was somebody was going to ask him at the presser about that. And the question became, okay, do we do that? Do I get to be the one to ask, or do we leave it for the audience? Somebody, one of the reporters in the audience. And my thought was, let's do it, get it out of the way, and then we can go on and talk about Sundance. And I met Bob in the green room beforehand, and Bob's response, I'm paraphrasing here, but what Bob said was, "Hey, you're the reporter. You do what you think is right as a reporter." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll ask it. We'll get it out of the way, and then we'll move on." And we did. And it was interesting because the quote about his response was that that he himself was fine with it. It's like he'll still be Robert Redford after that, whether he had an Oscar nomination or not, and that it was a matter of Hollywood being a business, and that Oscar nominations and Oscar campaigns are just that. They're campaigns. Uh, they are run like campaigns, and the studio that was backing that movie didn't run as big a campaign as was needed to get that nomination. No fault on them. They're just a smaller company, and that's the way it goes. Um, and it was interesting because that before we got off the stage, the trade papers were already running that quote in online. So uh,
Hmm.
it always struck me as how much the industry um, thinks about Redford and thinks about Oscars and so on in a certain way, and that Redford was playing a whole different game, and Redford was much more concerned about um, storytelling and getting people to tell their stories and getting people who might not have the access that he had over the years to get their stories told. And if he could use his fame and his connections to help young filmmakers uh, get their stories out through Sundance Institute, through the film festival, then that was a good trade-off. He would put up with a lot of the other trappings of fame if he meant he could use that fame to uh, to help other people get their stories out.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's a unique perspective. Just have about 3 or 4 minutes left here. Um, I'll have you talk about his environmentalism activism. That's going to be a big part of his legacy, right? Tell me just a
Yeah.
bit about that.
Well, I mean, in the the 70s, he got very involved in um, campaigning against putting a power plant in the Kapirowitz Plateau down there where what's now Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Um, and he took a lot of flack for it. He got burned in effigy by people that wanted to put that power plant down there. But the campaign was successful and the power plant didn't go in. And I think it can be argued that we would not have the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument if not for Robert Redford and obviously other people. But I think Bob's legacy, part of Bob's legacy, is that national monument exists now.
And this started, I guess he came to Utah. He encountered this place that became known as Sundance, and I guess it just struck him. Was that the beginning of his love for the environment?
That pretty much sums it up. And the fact that he was able to not just built his own family cabin there, but then develop the Sundance Resort, which to his final days he continued to be concerned about trying to set aside parts of the Sundance land for nature preserve. The last time I saw Bob was about 3 years ago, and the family had set aside 300 plus acres of aspens and wildflowers up there at Sundance Resort to become part of a nature preserve.
Hmm.
And it was obviously very near and dear to his heart. The ceremony was lovely. He read a letter that his son Jamie had written, and Jamie had died like less than 2 years before that. And it preserving Utah and preserving wild places was, I think, a very big thing for him. And his love for Utah. I mean, the fact that they filmed part of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in southern Utah. Filmed Jeremiah Johnson around Sundance, around the resort, and just captured that wildness, captured that sense of land that's untouched, and wanted to and that Bob was very much thinking that some of this land just needs to stay untouched, and he worked to do that.
What will you most remember about Bob Redford?
I will remember so many things. One sort of running joke that I've talked to people about is he had a very flexible relationship with time. He would sometimes be late to appointments or interviews and so on, and sometimes he'd show up immediately. And people at Sundance, the joke was Redford Standard Time. That basically, like royalty, royals always show up precisely on time. It's everyone else that's early. And when I did that first interview with him, I was in his waiting room. I was in the waiting room, and his assistant was at her desk, and she pulled out this small tub of oatmeal peanut butter cookies that had been made down at, I think, at the Tree Room at the restaurant at the resort. And they were called Waiting for Bob cookies because they knew the drill and they knew how this worked. The funny thing is he was on time and I only got about 2 bites in. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you for sharing those memories. Check out Sean Mean's story, and he's got another one. We've mentioned, I think, most of these movies, but he's got a second story, Watching Robert Redford, 7 of his career-defining roles. That's a good one to read. And Sean, I think you have another, I guess, remembrances coming out in the next couple of days. Yeah.
I spoiled a bit of it because some of the stories are the ones I just told you. But yes, I have a column running Sunday about my memories of encountering Bob over 30 years.
Okay. That's Salt Lake Tribune Deputy Enterprise Editor Sean Means. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, it's time for our underplayed stories of the week, and we'll start with Paighten Harkins. What's your underplayed story of the week?
My underplayed story of the week comes to us from Colby Peterson. She basically last week we found out that the New York Times had said Cosmica, a restaurant, like an Italian restaurant kind of across the street from TF Brewing, if you're familiar with that on 300 West. New York Times had said they were one of the best restaurants in the country, and they're pretty good. And it turns out that since that article came out, their business has just tripled. It's crazy. I went to go make a reservation, and it looks like the earliest one is in October 7th at 8:45, which I'm not going to take. So anyway,
Wow.
so yeah, and it's slim pickings. So you might have to wait, but it's probably worth the wait. And Colby gives you the scoop on that. So.
All right, check out Colby's story at sltrib.com. Sean Means, what's your underplayed story of the week?
This is one that our breaking news reporter, Brock Marchant, wrote, that posted this morning. We are up to 31 cases of measles in the state since this year, which is obviously far more than we have had in past years and far more than we should have. It's actually triple what we had in July, nearly triple. But the problem that health officials are saying is that it's probably more than that. And the way they know that is that the tests of wastewater in various parts of the state show that there is measles spread in places we have not recorded actual cases. Of the 31 cases, they're confined to 3 of the state's health districts. But there's been measles found in the wastewater in 5 other districts. So either something's not getting reported, or something else is going on. So there's probably more measles going on than we have had officially reported yet.
Check out that story and all the stories we've been talking about at sltrib.com. We'll reach the end of our program here. We've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Paighten Harkins. Paighten, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Salt Lake Tribune Deputy Enterprise Editor Sean Means has been with us. Sean, thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll be with me next time.